This is not a podcast about being broken, although you may have been. This is a podcast about strength for women who find themselves in difficult relationships, including that sometimes difficult one with yourself. We'll look at your relationship through a lens of psychology, faith, and a little dash of my own kind of feminism. We're not fixing them, we're fixing you, and that changes everything. Welcome to Stronger in the Difficult Places. Save yourself, heal your relationships. Listen in. Welcome to Stronger in the Difficult Places. I'm your host, Dr. Zoe. I am really feeling so happy to be here today. I've taken an unintended break. Some things have happened in my life that have caused me to pivot. I'm going to tell you why I've been away and why I'm back in just a minute. But first, I've been podcasting for 6 years. 6 years of regularly speaking to you. So getting on this microphone has really become an integral part of my life, and I've missed it. In the time that I've been off, I've thought about you daily. Even if I don't have names and faces to put with my thoughts, I've thought about you guys. I think about what you may need to hear. I think about how you may be struggling, and I think about how I can best support and help you. So first, I have been heads down finishing up my book that I finally submitted to my publisher about a month ago. So yay, I'm so thrilled that that's finally off of my shoulders for now until I get my edits back, which will probably happen soon. But that's not the reason I've been away. Finishing my book has given me space to think about how I want to share my news with you. During the time that I was writing my book, I was also ending my almost 30-year marriage. First, I wouldn't suggest that anybody do both of those things or attempt to do both of those things at the same time. It's been a long road. It's been the most difficult decision and journey of my life. And if any of you guys know my story, you know I've traveled some difficult roads. Also, I want to be super clear that I'm not sharing recent news with you. This decision to divorce was made a year ago, and we've just recently finalized the divorce. I think this is really important to note because as an influencer, as a content creator, a professional, and a helper, I feel it's important to share my struggles with you. It's the very reason why I do my weekly wins and my fails. But it's not always healthy or appropriate to share in real time, especially something as big as the dissolution of a marriage, because I have an obligation to share from a place of healing and not a place of pain. Otherwise, I don't feel I can be of any service to you. Not really. So, I have cried all my tears. I have shared my burdens with close friends, my family, and my therapist. I'm a year out from the beginning of my divorce journey. I'm healing, and I'm in a place to be of service to you. When I was going through my roughest patches, I stopped talking on here. But I am not easily silenced for long, and so I'm back. I'm a little wiser. I'm a little stronger. I'm probably a little more battle-worn, and I hope I'm a little more empathic towards those going through or contemplating a divorce. More importantly, I am an even stronger proponent of marriage, if that's even possible, than I ever was before. I know how much pain and upheaval is involved in ending a marriage, especially one of almost 30 years like my own. Me leaving my marriage was a last-ditch, must-happen decision after decades of trying to make it work. It was not a rash decision. In fact, I think if I'm honest, I waited too long to make this decision because I believe that strongly in marriage. I truly believe that God intended marriage to last a lifetime, and if you can at all make it work, I think we're obligated to. We are not obligated, however, to deteriorate our health and suffer and hurt each other in the name of keeping a marriage together. I see that too much in my work. Once a marriage ceases to be a marriage, then you are no longer upholding what God calls sacred. I believe it becomes a false idol. Now, I will forever be a proponent of marriage, and I will forever work to help people increase health in their marriage and their lives. That's my life's passion. I'm also going to be doing some pivots in my work. You know, in the past, I have touted that fixing your relationship with yourself will heal your relationship with others, but sometimes it doesn't. The stark reality is that sometimes your healing culminates in the end of a relationship. And I know that that can be a really hard pill to swallow. I think it was for me. So how do we navigate choosing health when health might also mean loss? It's also important for me to highlight that I am still here as a supporter, encourager, and champion of you first and foremost. I still believe strongly that our relationship with ourselves sets the stage for and it lays the foundation for all of our other relationships in our life, including our relationship with God. I'm still here for your marriage, if you're in one, because I believe that the work that you do on yourself creates a ripple effect that can heal difficult and even broken marriages. But not always. And I'm here for you too if you're struggling in your marriage, and God forbid, even if you're contemplating going through a divorce. Most importantly, I'm here to support you and your relationships, whether that means continuing to stay in a healthy one or navigating a difficult one or garnering the strength to leave a toxic one. I'm also going to be talking more from a place of faith and feminism as we navigate issues related to women and relationships and God's design for them and God's design for how we are to show up in the world as godly women with the knowledge of our worth. And of course, I will continue to focus on helping you grow a better relationship with yourself in all the beautiful ways. So, if I was going to sum up a win and a fail for the months that I've been off, I'd say that my win is that I garnered the strength and the courage to end a marriage that needed to end. That I walked past the fires of judgment, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, and dare I say, the codependency and shame. You guys know I have a shame journey, and shame is particularly complex shame is an issue that I've had to deal with in my life that I am continuing to overcome and maintain in a healthy way. My complex shame journey is a big part of the book that I've just written. And what I know is that for women who are in difficult relationships, they also have their own shame journey. And so part of my win is that I've overcome that as well in order to make the decision that I needed to make. And I did the hard thing. My fail is that I sometimes allowed my own negative self-talk and shame, my own imposter syndrome to keep me quiet, to keep me small, to keep me fearful in this process. And I'm going to be honest with you, I can catastrophize with the best of them. On my weakest days, I decided that I was destroying my family, my children, my career, that I'd lose my credibility, and that I would be judged and our lives ruined forever because of my divorce. I know that sounds catastrophic. And I'm telling you this because it's the truth that our minds can make up the very worst possible scenario and then paralyze us with it. Of course, none of that happened. My children are thriving. I'm thriving. And I'm glad that I didn't allow my fears to keep me from making healthy choices. My hope for you is that in sharing my story, that you find strength to walk your own journey, whatever that may be. So as I was contemplating this episode, I was thinking about what I wanted you to get out of this. And so for many of us who might be contemplating something as difficult as ending a marriage, for those who might be contemplating having a hard conversation, or those who may be feeling terrified to stand up for yourself, my hope is that hearing a bit of my process will be helpful for you. And for those who might just be curious about my story and wondering if I can help them, listen in. Life gets hard for everyone at some point, and learning how to navigate the hard and untangle yourself from unhealthy is a necessary skill for everyone. So when I was talking to my good friend Julie about this episode, she made a suggestion and I wholeheartedly embraced it. She suggested that I have someone interview me on my podcast. As soon as she made the suggestion, one person popped into my mind as the person that I wanted to interview me, and that is my personal coach, Rebecca Mullen. As I said before, I have a village of people who support me in my life. My best friend Rosie and my mom and my sister, they're on the front lines of the defense. Then I have other women, good friends in my life. I have my own therapist. I have a coach, Rebecca, who is my business coach, and really she's my life coach. And you too could also work with Rebecca. We'll tell you how, I'm sure, at the end of this podcast. As long as you don't take my spot, I'm good. And I think that when you hear her interview me, you're going to know why I adore her. She asks the best questions that get to the heart of the issues that always get me thinking, and consequently, they help me to be more intentional and productive both in my life and my work. You know, when we're going through dark times, we have to seek support. That's the healthy thing that strong women do. And I know that not everybody has the privilege of being able to take advantage of hiring help like I have, but you can still be intentional about your support. One of my best support systems in this whole process has been free podcasts. I subscribe to about 7 divorce-related podcasts, and they have been a lifesaver for me in my divorce journey. I have learned and I have grown through the experience of other women who have come before me. It's truly the best free support ever. So if you're struggling in something and you really need some support, there's probably a podcast for that. Remember, we used to say, there's an app for that. I don't think we say that so much anymore, but what I truly know is whatever issue you might be going through, there's a podcast for that. And I suggest that you utilize that free resource, even if you have a whole line of defense like I do as well. Podcasts are an excellent resource that you can take with you wherever you go. So, with Rebecca's help, I will walk you through the hardest decision of my life. It was hard personally, and it's hard to talk about. But remember, I'm a year out from it now. I'm going to walk you through a process of what you can do if something terrifying is happening in your relationship. I'm going to model for you how I tackled the hard questions and the fears that came up for me. Rebecca Mullen is an artist, a writer, and a coach. She hosts the podcast Habits for Your Happily Ever After, and her TEDx talk invites you to create peace at the dinner table with the stories you tell. She raised an animal-protecting vegetarian daughter at the same table as her bow-hunting boy. Rebecca helps you deepen the connection you have with yourself, your relationships, and your home. Rebecca believes that when we pay attention to the smallest details of our lives without judgment, welcoming the mud and the flowers alike, our greatest potential has room to expand. You can pre-order her book, 6 Steps to Better Marriage Communication. I'll put it in the show notes. The book is expected out before the end of the year, and I'm actually going to have her back on to talk about her book. So listen in to When Healing Doesn't Heal Your Relationship with Rebecca Mullen. Rebecca, I am so thrilled to have you on today. It feels like a very pivotal moment in my podcast, and I've never been interviewed, so it's weird. It's weird to be on this side of, I'm going to say this side of the couch, because as a therapist, it's very weird to be a patient, and I've been a patient before, and I'm always acknowledging how weird that is. And now as a podcast host, it's weird to be kind of a guest on my own show. But I am so very thankful that you are present and here to be able to ask me the questions, the difficult questions that I know you will. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. And I do want to say it's such a privilege that you asked me to do this. I feel so fortunate to have found you and to be connected. And so this is a thrill for me. So I will say I kind of have 3 general questions I want to be asking, and we'll take them one by one. But the first thing I want to just kind of be talking to you about is, how did this decision to divorce, how did you make that? How did you, because I know you didn't just wake up one day and say that. So I want to be talking about that first. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I want to talk about, after you've kind of begun to contemplate that, how did you begin to take steps? And so we'll talk about some of those steps. And then lastly, I want to really talk about your journey with God through this whole thing, because I know that both you and other women, that is a thing that keeps them in a relationship where it might be harmful to who they are.
Absolutely.
Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. And so for you guys listening, we have not pre-scripted this. I know that Rebecca asks great questions, and so we are just flowing. And so here we go. That sounds wonderful. And I'm also going to preface this by just saying that even talking about, I did an intro before we did this interview today, and it's hard to talk about these things. And so I just want to acknowledge that for myself. And I want to acknowledge that for listeners out there, that when we go through hard things in our life, it's hard to talk about them, but it's also so important. And as I said in the intro, I'm coming from a place of more healing. I'm not speaking just from a place of pain, but there's always pain involved. And shame is also a big one. And you guys know I'm writing about shame, and I love to research and really understand shame better. And so I always want to pay attention when I feel it in my body. And so I just want to acknowledge that as we're talking today, that I'm definitely feeling all of those things.
Mm. And I think that's part of the magic that you work, is that you do reveal, this is hard for me in this. And what I want to start with is the hardness that happened for you when you were just getting that beginning idea. I think something's wrong in my marriage. And you may not have even been saying, I want a divorce at that moment, but I'm imagining, since you are such a proponent of marriage, that you kept sort of shooing that thought out of your head. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not. I actually, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, I've always known there was something wrong in my marriage. And so for decades, I've been working to try to fix the things that were wrong in my marriage, imagining that I could do that, actually fashioning a career out of helping other people do and applying those same tools to myself to help other people stay in very difficult relationships. But as I continued to heal, there came a time when I had to realize and accept that I could not do it alone. I could not single-handedly carry a marriage, right? And that if I'm going to continue to move in any way in health, that I'm going to have to let go of this marriage, that I can't fix every relationship. And that sometimes includes my own. And what I had to do is let go of a dream, let go of the dream or the idea of my identity, both in the present and the future as a wife, because that's all I've seen myself as since I was 18 years old. And losing that identity felt very scary. I would even use the word terror was involved. It felt very scary. But what I know is that when we leave or we let go of something that we hold ourselves to be or we believe ourselves to be, and we walk in who we actually are and who we need to be in the future, we gain something so valuable that I really can't even put words on it.
Right. Yeah. And I want to come back to this idea that you, that you realized no matter how much I change, I can't have a marriage by myself. I want to come back to that question in just a minute. And before we talk about that, can you talk about, because I know that part of the reason you write about shame is that you have felt shame and you've done your own work. Absolutely. And gone, okay, this is shame, this is fear, all those things. What was that journey like, hearing the whisper of the voice and being able to bring it more and more forward, because shame makes us hide things, right? And shame makes us cover them up. How did you get to where you could actually hear yourself say, I think there's something wrong in my marriage and I may need to get a divorce?
There's always a knowledge that this marriage is not healthy in the way that it should be. But there came a point when, and without disclosing too much, there was an interaction between my husband and I where I was applying all the tools that I've always been applying and attempting to speak from the I point of view and express my feelings. And during that interaction, I realized that I would never be heard in the way that I need to be heard. That our ability, and I want to say our because I don't want to just put this on my husband, but our ability to communicate in a healthy way will never happen. And because I don't know exactly why, and maybe it was because I know that I did every single thing that I have been doing, every single thing I possibly can to show up in the healthiest way I could. I knew that there was just no possible way that this marriage could maintain itself in a healthy way. So it was, it was a particular interaction where I was showing up in the most authentic, vulnerable, way that I could and speaking my truth in the best way that I could. And when it still couldn't be heard, I knew there wasn't any moving forward.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like what you knew was that you had the courage of having done your work. Mm-hmm. So you kind of came to that clean place of going, I'm bringing everything I have to give to this table. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, it's not being met in a way that I can trust and move forward. And that was the moment that you began to go, okay, now I need to move from wondering about how to stay in this marriage to wondering, how do I exit this marriage?
Exactly. Yeah, that was the point when I realized this is maybe an idol that I really need to let go. That this is an idol I need to let go. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about when you use that word idol, I can hear it's very specific. Mm-hmm. And so in what way were you worshiping the marriage and not God?
Right. Coming from a fundamental Christian background and believing so much in marriage and believing in that marriage is sacred, I know both for myself and what I've seen other women do is that we uphold marriage as almost equal to holiness, as if the two are the same, right? And so when I say idol, I mean that my marriage and me being a married woman, me having a marriage that's intact meant so much to me, even more than health, even more than needing to have the true two becoming one in the partnership, both in the social aspect and then also in the spiritual aspect, that I did not really separate the two of those. And so I really did make marriage this idol that I had to keep and uphold and almost worship in a sense at the detriment of everyone, including myself. Well, I've seen so many clients who live in marriages that are not really marriages. They're living in the same home, but they're living very different lives. I started to really begin to understand the concept of what does divorce mean? And when does divorce happen? And so as I'm working with so many couples, different states have different laws, right? So there's the legal divorce and when a divorce can happen, Nevada's like 5 days, California's 6 months. There's all these different processes. And I realized that legal divorce and emotional and spiritual divorce are so very different. And sometimes they happen years or decades before a marriage legally ends. And sometimes they never happen even after a marriage legally ends. And so I began to understand, I think, that the divorce had already happened. I was just holding it up as an idol and not willing to let it go.
I get it. Yeah, I get that. Okay, so now you've begun to ask yourself the question, okay, if I'm not going to stay married, what happens next? And I know I'm sure it was just this, first of all, it's a scary question.
Yes.
So maybe if you could address a little bit of how it's a scary question. And so giving us let us borrow from your courage that you had and hear that. And then also, I want to hear kind of the tiny steps that got you to the place that you could begin to take some action.
Yeah. I was not in a place where I could just say, I'm getting a divorce. Boom, let's do it. Go hire the attorneys and let's gung ho off to the races. It was a slow, so even getting to that final realization was probably about 5 years, to be honest with you. It was struggling and finally getting to a place where I realized, okay, this can't happen anymore. But what I didn't know was how. And what I had to tell myself is, I know that our marriage needs to be over. I know we need to separate, but I don't know what that's going to look like. And so I had to be willing to sit in the ambiguity and the fear of this is happening and I'm going to do it, but I don't know how. And I made some phone calls and scared myself. I called, I did make an attorney call, and I called about just financial stuff and got very scared and went to the catastrophic level of, I can't do this. I can't make this work. I don't know how I can untangle a 30-year marriage. We're going to be all destitute and all of the things. And on top of that, and now I'm going to be this relationship expert who's divorced. How is that going to work? Am I going to lose my whole career? Am I going to lose my credibility? All of those things. Right. And so I really had to come back. And by the way, I've also been in therapy, and I have a wonderful therapist who's been working with me through all of this, but I really had to bring myself back to a place of center and know that I'm going to be okay. There are women who have done this for centuries before me, and they've been okay. And my children are going to be okay. I don't know how it's going to look, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. But what I am going to do is I'm going to just take the next right step. And so that's what I started doing, is figuring out, okay, what's the first step I need to do in all of this? Who do I need to call? What do I need to put in place? And initially, I wasn't even willing to get a divorce. I only wanted to get a separation because that felt possibly doable for me. The divorce felt too scary. And so I started with that, with just a legal separation, which then we ended up, turning into a divorce. But for me, it was just, what's the smallest next step I can take in that direction?
So I don't want to lose the big question I want to be asking you is about those worst case scenarios. So I'm going to circle back to that in a second, but I do want to pause for just a second. And if you could just suggest to women who are listening, what might some of those tiny steps look like? Just if you could imagine 3 of those tiny steps, and maybe they're not even yours, but either in your practice or in your big world, you've seen that these tiny steps began to help people.
So one of the first ones that I can think of is a mental shift towards accepting that this is going to be your new reality, right? And so for me, I started subscribing to podcasts of women who were divorcing or healthy single parents. I have a podcast of about seven podcasts that I listen to regularly that's all about really encouraging and supporting women in the divorce process to a healthy place. It helped to normalize that people are doing this. I can do it. And I would get little nuggets of things that I could do for myself or just kind of family business. So the next thing I did is I needed to look at my finances, which is really hard. But I think the first little step I did was probably consulting an attorney just so that I could understand a little bit about the process. I didn't hire the attorney. Those were the first 2 steps. Here, I want to segue into saying that I want to talk about the steps of decision making.
I think that's what I wanted to hear. I just needed to, and I think a lot of it is that normalizing it for yourself. You did that by researching, by just steeping yourself in people who were experiencing it. Right. And that maybe someone who's listening that wonders, well, how could I even imagine that? Just beginning to listen to someone's podcast. In fact, this podcast, because you're going to be talking and normalizing some of that as you go forward. So I think that's helpful. But I want to come back to all those worst case scenario questions you were asking yourself. And I know that for you, that is part of the process, is that we as women, in some ways in society, we go, but how can I do this not married? And then we just spiral into asking ourselves worst case scenario question after worst case scenario question. And so can you speak to that cycle of asking the horrible questions and what happens if you don't answer them?
Oh, yes. So for me, I've been with my husband since I was 18 years old. So it's hard now. I'm 48 to have a sense of who am I without the marriage and the construct of the family in the same way. And so shame, of course, was a big part of it. And any of my listeners who know my story know that I have a history of shame that started before I even met my husband. And that's also chronicled in my book coming up. And so as I began to kind of go down the shame spiral, which is the catastrophizing, who am I? How are people going to perceive me? What does this mean now that I've failed in this way? Who am I as a failed, wife? And what is this going to look like in the future? I had to do some of the same grounding exercises that I work with my clients on. And that is when we get so worked up and anxious, our brain often asks us a question and it'll say, what happens if this happens? Well, what happens if, you lose your house? Or what happens if nobody wants to work with you anymore because you're this divorced woman? And what happens if you lose your speaking engagements? And so when we start to ask ourselves all of these what ifs, what we don't tend to do is answer the question. We just continue to go on to ask more questions and we just sit in a pool of anxiety. And I call that leaving your brain hanging. When you ask a question and you leave your brain hanging, your brain doesn't know anything to do except say, I'm in danger. I could possibly die. I'm going to go straight into survival mode, right? And we've got all the cortisol and all of these anxiety producing stressors in our body just firing. And so what we have to do is we have to answer the darn questions, right? Because when we answer the question and we come to some type of conclusion, our brain goes, oh, okay, I'll be okay. And so I had to say, okay, so what if I get on my podcast and I tell everybody I'm the divorced woman and nobody wants to listen to my podcast again? Okay, so what if that happens? Then I have to answer the question, well, then I will shift and I will find new listeners and I will find other people who need to hear my story, who I can help, right? And if this audience now is not my audience, I will find new people because I do have a story and I do have knowledge and I do have wisdom. And so just in saying those couple of things, even now I can just feel my body go, oh, okay.
So we can hear it in your body. We can hear that transition from the panic of asking the question to just simply entertaining the answer.
Right.
I can feel you relaxing.
Yes. And so with every time I would ask myself a question that was just anxiety asking the question, I would answer it. And I would sit and I would go through and, well, what if this? Well, then this is what I'll do. Well, what if this happens? Well, then this is what I'll do. And I was able to walk myself through all of those very scary, terrifying steps of uncoupling, a marriage by just calming myself in that way.
So one of the things I think your listeners are going to be able to hear is if they're having those panicky questions, go ahead, write the question down or say the question out loud so that it's not just fear. It's also something you can hear specifically, then begin to answer the question.
Right. And over time, when you're doing that regularly, you'll find also that you tend to stop asking the questions because you already know there's going to be an answer. Even if it's not the best answer, there's going to be a conclusion. And so you don't need to even start ramping up in that process. But when we are in a very highly anxious state, our brain tends to do that. And it's okay. We just need to answer.
Okay. All right. So we'll get used to that.
Yeah.
It seems like as you were going down this road, you've made the decision, okay, we're going to get a legal separation. I'm guessing that every single thing you tried, like you just said, okay, I'm going to take the next step. Maybe all of them didn't work out. How did it feel when something that you tried didn't work out and you realized you were going to have to do something different? What did that feel like?
That's great. Yeah. I started with the legal separation because I was too terrified to be able to actually make the leap to a divorce. And in the process of, anyone who's gone through a divorce, there's so much just kind of legal going back and forth and the paperwork and having to agree and mediate and all of those things. And when I would come back from an interaction where it didn't go the way that I had hoped, I would definitely feel myself going down that fear spiral, not the shame spiral, but just the fear spiral. Like, I don't know if I can do this. And I remember specifically a time when I was walking, just pacing in my backyard, talking to my mom and saying, I think I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. This is too hard. I don't know if I can do it. It would have been easier to just stay married than to go through this. And I felt that very deeply in the moment, but there was still that spark, that deeper knowing that I know I'm doing the right thing, but this is just really terrifying and scary. And so to answer your question, I think I really leaned on my community. I called the people that I needed to call. I leaned on my friends and my family and my therapist to remind me of why I was doing what I was doing. And I know that we need those reminders sometimes when we get in the darkest places because our brain doesn't want to go there. Our brain just feels like this hurts. I want to stop it. I don't want to do this. And so in addition to the asking the questions thing, I think in those deepest, darkest times, I would lean on my community, my support system.
Okay. So now I want to pretend that the person listening is a friend of someone who's going to get a divorce. What were the most comforting things you heard in those moments when you leaned on your community so we know how to support a woman who's going through this choice?
That is so good. Such a good question. Because I think that sometimes people assume that when someone has chosen a divorce, that they're doing it haphazardly, that they haven't thought and put a lot of pain, energy, just so much into that decision. And so I can tell you what wasn't helpful is people that would question me about almost kind of, did you work hard enough? Do you think you should try this? Or that I think was hard to hear. And maybe to some extent, I'm always willing to listen to people because I want to always consider people's advice. But that was hard. I can tell you that my friends who just said, whatever you need, I'm here. That was so helpful. I didn't always want to just tell all the stories and explain all the things, but for friends who just said, whatever you need, I'm here. I support you. I know you're probably making a decision that you need to make for your life. And it's just kind of just trusting me and then being there. And then also the friends that would check on me and text me and say, can I help with this specific thing? Can I pick up your daughter? Can I, if you need to do this, I'm here for that. So it's great to say whatever you need. And I think that that's a really comforting feeling. But sometimes, just like in grief, people don't know what they need. And they're also not going to take the time to step out and ask the question. But if there's something specific that you see in their life that you could maybe step in and help, that's really helpful. But my brother, when I finally told him that we were divorcing, I think we were closer towards the tail end of the divorce. And my brother's a psychologist. And what he said to me was it just warmed my heart so much, is he said, I've heard that when people are going through a divorce or when people are divorced, an appropriate response is congratulations. And when he said that to me, I see your face is like shock. I felt the same thing, but I thought, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for congratulating me for doing the really hard thing. And so his congratulations, and he didn't even ask me any questions. He didn't ask me why. He didn't ask anything. He just said, congratulations. And later, I think he just said, how are you doing? Or that kind of thing. But to get that response when I was worried that I would get the judgment response was just so comforting, and it felt so loving.
And it sounds like what the subtext of that word, congratulations, was he trusted this was not something you came to lightly. Right. And so if you're going to say that, it means you have been through it. Exactly. And he's saying, congratulations on the hard work that goes into that kind of decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a good, you gave us really clear things that we could say to somebody, super specific things like meals and kid help and cleaning the house or keeping you company, coming over with a deck of cards to help you laugh, whatever. That's super specific. Or the I'm here kinds of sentiments to just because you're afraid you're going to lose fear begets fear. So if we're afraid during a divorce, we're afraid we're also going to lose all our people. You know?
And it is inevitable that in a divorce, you lose people. And so when people can come to you and say, essentially, you're not going to lose me, I'm here and I support you, that is extremely relieving to someone who's going through a divorce.
This is a tiny little sidebar question, but when you realized you were losing some people, how did you stay true to yourself and your decision that you came to, not easy decision, but you understood what you needed when you began to see that you were going to lose people? How did you grieve those are like collateral losses in a divorce?
Yes. I think that's such a great question, Rebecca. And I think I should preface this by saying that my catastrophic fear of all the people that I would lose never happened. So the ones that were the very most important to me that I was worried would judge me or reject me absolutely never happened. But there were some minor, I hate to necessarily refer to people that way, but
circle of people.
Yeah, people who are further out in my circle who I definitely felt that from and had that experience with. And for me, it was just reminding myself, who's walked your story? Who's lived your life? I can understand from their point of view with the life that they've lived that they wouldn't make a decision like this and wouldn't have to. But because I know that what I did was the very best thing that I could do for myself. And if they were me in my shoes and walked my life and lived in my marriage, they probably would have done the same thing. I can give them the benefit of the doubt, and I can understand that they don't understand. So I can have empathy for their judgment, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I understand why they're judging. And I also know that I have been that person, that I have maybe not about a marriage, but in other ways, I have judged people based on my life, not understanding what they walked through and what they lived. And so if I have to say one thing, I think that this divorce has given me, it's given me more empathy. And even though I like to, I hate to use the word pride, but I'm going to use that word pride. I like to pride myself on being non-judgmental. I can see where I still have more growth. I still have more growth. And so I think that because I've seen times in my life where I've been judgmental of other people when I don't understand what walk they're walking, I can have empathy for those who need to leave me or drop me. And I also know that that's their fear too, because a lot of people have fear that divorce is contagious. And whether it is or it isn't, I haven't done that research, but I can also understand that there's fear there. And I'm choosing not to walk in fear anymore.
I can hear in every pore of your body that what the work you did additionally to, all the courage it took to work on the marriage and then realize that's not going to work. And so then work on your independent self and how you were going to exit. Another layer of work I can hear in your heart is compassion for people who are going to judge you and just man, welcoming that judgment in a way that says, I see you and I see what I'm making you be afraid of by having that and that compassion starts with yourself. So it's so clean that you have that compassion. So obvious you have that self-compassion that you can say, I don't always live up to my ambitions.
Yes.
I'm on the journey to do it.
Yep.
And I don't always make it there. Being able to say that and still know you're enough and not, not have shame. That just feels like, I don't know if that's always been part of who you are or if that's the journey you've gone on.
That is a hard paid for journey. A very, very highly paid for journey. Yes. Yes. And, and like you said, a one I'm still on. Yeah.
Yeah. And you are reaping it because I can feel that it's genuine when you say some people judged me and I lost them as a result. I can hear that caused you pain and you have compassion for them. And I think there are a lot of listeners who want to hear a lot more about that one, because I think oftentimes what holds us in a relationship where we don't belong anymore is the fear of what other people are going to think. So,
as you said that, I'm remembering some things that I said to myself early on when I was so very fearful of that judgment to really help ground me in my decisions, because I know that my people-pleasing tendencies and my fear of being rejected and judged drove my decisions to stay in the marriage. And I would say to myself, as I was trying to make decisions, if no one had any opinion, any judgment, if nobody had anything negative to say to me about this, or maybe even if everyone supported me, what decision would I make? And it helped me I was always able to clearly come to the decision. And that's when I would realize, oh, I was just fearful of judgment. It wasn't that I didn't know what to do. I was just so scared. So it doesn't take away the fear, but what it does do is it allows me to hone in on the actual decision that I know I need to make. And then I know that my job is to figure out how to overcome that fear. So all of that was there and still is to some degree, but that's one of my workarounds is if nobody had any opinion, any say, any judgment, what decision would I make?
That's how you can really hear your authentic choice instead of a choice clouded by the people pleasing.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. I want to talk now about how this happened, God and your relationship with church. This is all really important to you. And so I know that was an issue and that there are a lot of voices in a fundamentalist church that say, who are you to leave your husband? And so we want to hear what that felt like to you.
Yeah. You're not allowed. There's certain grounds for divorce, some things that Moses put into law, right? And the Old Testament. Abuse was never part of that because women were assumed to be there wasn't really any concept of abuse on women. Women were property and, men could essentially do what they wanted with them. And, I think the idea was that they should be kind, but abuse was never a reason or a ground for divorce. And so I'm just saying that because I have read the Bible through. I have read, Moses's law, and then I understand that Jesus came to replace the law. And there's so many things when it comes to, number one, purity culture, when it comes to marriage and the Christian church that are really more cultural than they are biblical. Also, once again, the idol that the Christian church has held up of purity and virginity, and the effect that it's had on young women and the shame that it's had on young women, and also how it has pushed young women to get married very, very early to prevent premarital sex. So, the purity culture really drove so many young kids to get married because you better get married so that you don't have premarital sex. And then they're married and, they have marriages they weren't ready for it. They're not healthy. They maybe weren't even compatible in many ways. And yet now, because you can never get divorced, they've gotten caught up in this. So we kind of got off on a tangent.
Yeah. So I think, and this is me imagining what you were feeling. And so just listen for where I'm wrong. There is a level in the church that women fail because that whole verse about wives be subordinate to your husbands, so a woman doesn't get to decide if she belongs in a marriage or not. It's not a woman's job to decide, I think I want out. That's just not considered.
Right.
So there's that. But then there's also sort of a cultural message that the church may be contributing to, or that's just our society, that because women are in charge of keeping a family tended, if the woman exits the family, she has failed. And so I want to know, what I'm most curious about is, what is the personal relationship you have with God? And how did that figure? What was it like as you were pondering these questions and these assumptions? How did you separate the church from God, or society from God, or am I way off? And none of that was part of your decision-making process.
That was the biggest struggle, I think, is to make a decision to end a marriage when the church tells me that it's wrong, that I can't do it, that I don't have the ability to make that decision, that I don't have a choice. What I know is that in my relationship with God and my prayer life and my talking to God and my understanding of God's love for me, which is number one, of course, unconditional and also non-shaming, and that God has a knowledge of me and my experience that's deeper than anybody else's. What I know is that I don't believe that God intended me to live a life where I have a legal marriage that is not the spiritual marriage that God designed. And why I believe so strongly in marriage is because I do believe that God designed marriage as a place where two become one, and all of the ways and facets that two can become one, and where we support each other both spiritually, emotionally, in our lives, and where we're business partners, all the things. And that's God's design for a marriage. But when a marriage is not that, it's not God's design. And I don't believe that I was serving God, that I was in any way walking in a healthy way by staying in a toxic, unhealthy marriage, that it wasn't serving me or my children or my family or even my husband. And that ultimately staying in that place can actually get in the way of a healthy spiritual life. And I know that some people feel like, well, I should suffer because suffering is part of being a human or part of being a Christian. And I think to some extent, absolutely suffering is a part of life. Absolutely. But I don't believe that we should continue to inflict purposefully suffering on each other as humans when we don't need to. There's plenty of suffering that can happen as a result of just being alive. And so in my relationship with God, I feel great. I feel good. I know that I did everything as a wife to try to honor my marriage. And my husband, ex-husband, we come to our marriages as broken people often, right? And we all try to walk out health. We all try to really, in the imago sense, use our marriage to heal us. And sometimes that works in a healthy way. Sometimes it does. And sometimes it doesn't. And so it's not even about demonizing anybody. It's just the reality that we weren't able to really create that two becoming one and the spiritual sense that God intended for a marriage. And so when that wasn't, I think about it as pulling the plug on a marriage that was already dead. And so from my understanding of the Bible, my understanding of everything that I've read about what God intends and what Jesus said is that in many ways as humans, we are not walking and living as God intended for us to, right? We humans have a psyche. We humans walk out every day in ways that I think pains God. And not being able to stay in healthy marriages is a part of that. But it doesn't mean that we can't have a relationship with God, because God loves us in our broken state, every single one of us. And I think about David. I was just reading through David, and, God says that David was a man after his own heart. And yet David was such a broken man, and not to say that, oh, well, David was adulterous and he killed someone and he did these things, so it should be okay. No, it's not that it was okay. It was never okay. But God understands us in our human state, and he knows our heart. And I know that God knows my heart. And I know that God wants more for me and my family than for us to sit in unhealthiness and toxicity just so that we can uphold this idol of marriage.
The law. Yeah. So if Jesus is on the other line, when you're making those backyard phone calls because you're falling apart and you need some support, what is Jesus saying on the phone?
Well, when I think about when the disciples asked him, like, what's the most important law, and he was like, of all that stuff that you guys are so, obsessed with, this law, it's just to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I just think that Jesus would be like, I love you, and I've got you, and you're going to be okay. And your job is to just love.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Just in case you want to include it, what can your listeners expect in the future? What does this pivot look like? How are you going to continue to be there for us as we try to become our best self inside our relationships? Yeah. Knowing that when we change, our relationship changes, right? Because that's your phraseology. And then also, how can you give us the courage of it? We're working on ourselves, and we can feel that we're mismatched. That spiritual connection isn't there. How can you give us courage to find that exit strategy? And then lastly, how can you help us know the difference?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that I am not now a cheerleader and like, rah, rah, let's everybody go get divorced. So that is not what I will be or am. I made the hard decision for myself, and everybody has to make their own decisions because everyone's situation is so different. And so what I don't want someone to do is hear this and go, oh my gosh, well, she couldn't make it work, so maybe now I can't make it work. And absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is so much work that can be done in a marriage that is even completely broken. If two people are willing to do it, you can build that marriage back up to stronger than it ever was. And so I do want to give women hope out there who may feel that they're in a broken marriage. There is hope. It takes work. You need to put the work in. And sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes. But you've got to put the work in first before you decide that it's not enough. Because I feel that if I hadn't done all of those things, I wouldn't be in such a place of confidence, knowing that I did everything I could and that this is what needs to happen in my life.
So if she realizes she is going to exit, you're going to be talking to us about how to give her courage in the future is my hunch.
Right. So moving forward, I'm going to continue to talk about a lot of the things that I have they will have a greater slant towards shame as well, because I know that shame is a big part of my marriage story and my divorce story. And my guess is that if you're struggling in a relationship, shame is probably a big part of your story too. And so I'm going to be talking about that. And I'm here to support women who are struggling in difficult relationships. I'm here to support women who are trying to figure out how to get out of difficult relationships. And part of that, when we talk about courage, I feel like finding that courage is just showing up every day, trying to find your support and trying to do the next small right thing that you can. And so I'm excited to talk to women about building themselves up, because in order to get the courage, you have to kind of work towards building yourself up to a place of strength and health. And you can absolutely do that in the midst of a difficult relationship. I feel like there's like this teeter-totter, like this leap place, like you've got to work on yourself and you've got to work on yourself and you've got to get healthy and you've got to find some healthy independence. And there comes a point where there's like a threshold where either that health and independence is going to spill into creating health in your marriage and your relationship, or it's going to mean you need to take a leap outside of your relationship. And you will know, there will come a point where you will know that I'm feeling healthy. I'm feeling strong. I know I'm good. And so now I've got to figure out what's going on here. And I didn't plan my moment when I knew, but it happened and I knew, and there was no turning back from it. And so if you're still in that place of, I don't know yet, you're still struggling, you just have a little more work to do. You have some more work to do, and that's okay. That's okay.
Because, and this is another thing I hope you will keep telling your audience, is you can love yourself while you're becoming. That's what we really see in you, is that when you can get rid of shame and have compassion for the fact that you're not all the way who you want to be.
Yeah.
You can forgive your partner. You can forgive society. You can forget, and mostly you can forgive yourself. And, so I have the more you talk to us about that kind of thing, I think we will benefit.
Yeah, we have to love ourselves in our becoming and the process of becoming, because we're always becoming. I will never fully be shame-free, but what I have learned is how to manage my shame in such a way that it's no longer sabotaging my life, right? I pray for wisdom every day. Wisdom is like, for me, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I desire wisdom to such an extent that I don't know why I do so much, but I pray for it. But I also know I will never be, fully wise. There will always be points or deficits, I should say, but I have to love myself along the way, because we will never reach our full potential until we die. And so I think it's fine to acknowledge for ourselves that we're not fully healed. We're not fully perfect. We're not fully there, but we're on a journey. And if I look back last year, if I look back 5 years ago, if I look back 10 years ago, I'm so much further. And, my sister even read an early copy of my book. And one of the things that she said to me is, but you're still struggling with shame. And it made me feel a sense of imposter syndrome for a little while. But now I feel like I can own that. Yes, I wrote a book on shame. I wrote a book on overcoming shame, but it's okay that I will never fully overcome it. But what I know I will do is I have mastered it in a way, and in such a way that I can maintain it in a healthy way in my life. And so that is what I want to continue to talk with women about, is how to work on themselves. Remember, we're not fixing them, we're fixing you. And that does change everything. And it changes everything in a good way, even though it feels scary, even though those leaps and those threshold points are really terrifying. You're moving in a healthy direction.
Is there anything else that you want to tell us?
I want to thank you for facilitating this conversation, for helping me to get my words out and some of my story out. I really appreciate it.
It is so my privilege that you included me and that you invited me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So how can people find you, Rebecca?
Yes.
So that you can help. Well, let's talk about a little bit about just what type of work that you do.
Well, the part of the reason that I resonated with you the very first time I heard your podcast is that when we change ourselves, we change every relationship in our life. Yeah. And my marriage has died twice. But my husband and I were able to resurrect my marriage. And so we're on that quote unquote third marriage, but I'm just the same person, right? Yes. So where I had what feels good fortune to me is that, and it's just a different story, right? It's a different place to go, is I feel lucky that we were both willing and able to change and grow and bend and meet each other. Because there were moments we were missing. And then we let the dust settle and we rebuilt. And as I changed, I watched him change. And so out of that grows my podcast, which is Habits for Your Happily Ever After. That is my story about, I've been studying relationships and marriage since my parents' divorce when I was 5 years old. I've just watched every marriage, asked impertinent questions. I was a coach at, really young because I was always asking those questions. So people can listen to my podcast and head to my website. I've got a book coming in just a couple of weeks, months. I don't know if we're on that, where we are on that timeline, but it's called 6 Steps to Better Marriage Communication.
I love it. And
hopefully I will get to come and be a guest on your podcast with that book. That would be a thrill.
You are already invited. I can't wait to have you on. And cool. You have been, we haven't even been working together that long, but you have already just been so helpful to me as a coach. And so I highly, highly recommend you to anyone out there who may be in a need of a coach.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. That means so much to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for listening to Stronger in the Difficult Places. New episodes will go out on Tuesdays. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe so that you will be notified of new episodes, and go over to my website and hop on my email list at zoe@drzoeshaw.com. I will send you weekly encouragement. If this show is helpful, or if you know it may be helpful for a friend, please hit that like button and share it. And if you feel so inclined, I would appreciate a review. Have a strong week.